Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with not one but two album reviews. If you want, you can watch them both. Otherwise, you probably clicked on this one because you're interested in seeing it. We got some public service broadcasting going on for this video. We're going to be looking at their 2015 album, The Race for Space. It's only 43 minutes long, comprised of 9 songs, many of them in the 3 to 4 minute range, though we do have a couple in the 6 and 7. I don't know anything about this band. I vaguely remember maybe we did one of their songs on a live stream or something like that. I don't think we've ever done a full actual reaction to one. So I'm going in totally uninformed on this one. We have a 2.5 minute intro track followed by a 7 minutes. It's their second longest track on the whole album. I assume we're just going to run them back to back, but we'll see what happens after the end of The Race for Space. Maybe I'll have things I want to talk about it specifically before diving into 7 minutes of more music. With all that said, let's get this rolling. Kick it off with The Race for Space.
We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear. In an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds.
It's a very expansive harmonic palette here. It definitely feels like the type of chords frequently used for sci-fi epics. Vaguely reminds me of like Star Trek a little bit. The choir makes me think of Halo. It definitely has a very spacey feel to it.
Flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace.
Interesting working in some sorrow in there.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory, who was to die on Mount Everest,
dang.
was asked why did he want to climb it.
That dip in the progression in the middle.
He said because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it. And the moon and the planets are there. And new hopes for knowledge and peace are there. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
Alright, I do want to take a moment to stop here. That was a little bit of music. I probably could have written down something like, choir. And it would have like triggered all the memories I need for the song. There's not a lot to it. But I do want to bring this up primarily because I'm kind of invested already. So it's a very straightforward track. We have a sample of... I should recognize the voice. It's a US president. I don't know though. I'll look it up later. It's a sample though. It seems to be about exploring space. I mean, it is called The Race for Space. I'm expecting. I mean, we have tracks called Sputnik, Valentina. The rest are kind of vague. I mean, Tomorrow, Go, The Other Side. Yeah, there is a track called Fire in the Cockpit, though. I'm thinking that one's going to be fairly tragic. And the last one that I don't understand is Gagarin. I'm thinking that much like Sputnik, that's probably a name of some spacecraft that I just don't know about. But we are looking at what is this? Mid 60s? Is that when the space race was going on? I'm a little bit outside of my informational depth. I will probably have to do a little bit of research while looking up the lyrics on this. Well, lyrics. So far, at least samples. Maybe the rest of the tracks are more lyrical. In fact, I don't even know what kind of music we're on board for. This feels like an intro. We got samples and we got choir. I mean, this could be the beginning of a metal album, for all I know. Um, but yeah, I mean, if this is the topic, which the title of the album, title of the tracks is leaning towards, I'm going to have to brush up a little bit on that. But we have the sample of the president there giving a speech about going to space. And behind it is choir. It's a lot of chords, honestly. There's not really melody coming out of there. We do have slow layering of things, not just like the entire choir singing at one time, but bringing in one note and then another and then another, then another. One thing I like about doing those movements is that we can recontextualize it, where maybe there is a more somber note in the middle of a chord. We'll have the first one to provide a root, and then the next one that kind of feels more expansive. It's a large jump up. It creates an epic feeling, and then a little bit of that somber feeling to give it a darker tinge before capping it off with something that makes it feel grand or epic. I like that exploration of chords, and I love how they use it too. Sometimes we do just get the full chord, and we get this very expansive, vast, epic chordal movement. And then after that, they'll do this slow walk up, maybe with that subversion in the middle. It kind of keeps everything grounded a little bit. Maybe some foreshadowing, possibly. I mean, we do have a song called Fire in the Cockpit going on in here, so obviously the ambitions and the pride of the entire space race concept of getting into space, visiting the moon. There's a lot of pride in that as a nation, as a world, even. I know it was a space race against nations, but even the sheer concept that humanity as a whole found a way to put enough energy behind us to break away from the rock we were born on to explore another is fascinating. It is amazing. It's just it's definitely something to be proud of as a human race. But there's so much danger to that too. There is very little outside of our Earth that's inhabitable for us, and the vacuum of space is certainly not it. Particularly even the moon, which, someone correct me if I'm wrong, the moon doesn't have an atmosphere to it, does it? It's still, like, if you land on the moon and you take off your helmet or whatever, you're exposing your body to the vacuum of space. Am I correct? I might be a little off on that, but I do know that the moon is not a habitable place for humanity either. And, we have, there's going to be loss, there's going to be pain in this process, uh, not just even landing on some place, but the process of getting off of the earth. There's failure in that. You have to do failure is how we learn. Nothing is ever accomplished on the first try. And so I like interworking some of that because I mentioned that, parts of the chords in here, they sort of reminded me of Star Trek at times. Yeah, there's some very expansive, very optimistic, vast sci-fi, like generic sci-fi chords going on in here. They do remind me a little bit of Star Trek, but the music of Star Trek, usually the theme song, and particularly, I'm thinking of like Next Generation. It is about the optimism. It is about the positivity. But that's not the reality of space exploration. At least, I mean, not even now, but certainly not even in the 60s. There's loss, there's failure, there's difficulty, there's hurdles. It was even in the speech. We don't do it because it's easy, we do it because it's hard. And I like how, despite kind of slipping into some of these sci-fi cliches, harmonically, that we still root it, we still ground it in the emotions of the process of it, not just the victory that occurs at the end of this long journey. I'm a big fan of that. There's a lot of emotional resonance in here, and I'm here for it. And I suppose that's going to wrap this one up. We're going to move into. I'm going to look up the sample and I guess a little bit of backstory. I don't have anything else to say about this specific track, but it is, like I said, I'm engaged. They've got me hooked in, and that's what a good opening track does. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, so it was Kennedy, which is what I was thinking, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot, so I didn't go with my gut. That's what I get for ignoring it. But it is Kennedy's speech saying that there's change upon us. We're going to go to the stars. It's the next frontier for us as humans. And he says that we're going to be the first ones to be up there. He says we will not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. And then he answers a hypothetical question: why go up there at all? And he quotes the British explorer George Mallory, who, when asked why he wanted to climb Mount Everest, he said, because it's there. And so, Kennedy states, space is there, so we will climb it. Now, here's something interesting. In an interview with the group, Public Service Broadcasting, they mentioned that they had never written for a choir before, but that it felt appropriate, stating, it felt right to start the album with human voices. I like that. If we're going to have a story about humanity as a whole, starting that story off with a choir is a fantastic decision. I love that. That is something that's like right there, clear as day. Yeah, that makes sense. You don't have to really reach for it. And I completely missed it in my read. I mean, part of that though is too that I don't know what we're in store for. Maybe the whole album could have been choir. So having the rest of the album as context might have helped me come to that conclusion. But it is a very cool decision to make. I'm glad they went in that direction because it works very well. All right. Like I said, track 2 is one of our longest ones on the album. Let's dive in. 7 minutes worth of Sputnik.
This is the beginning of a new era for mankind. The era of man's cosmic existence.
So more samples. I don't know who this one is though.
You will now hear the voice of the Russian moon.
This one's quite a bit dancier though, going for an electronic direction. Love that warmth on the outside that just came in with that low tone. What's going on with the samples
All over the
bouncing?
world, people are tuning into the bleep, bleep of the satellite.
Is that fuzz that was coming in part of the sample, the recording? Or did they want that to feel like it was overwhelming white noise? Did they add that in themselves?
A dream cherished by men for many centuries comes true on October the 4th, 1957.
For a moment, I thought this might have been an intro to the track, continuing on from that opening track,
celestial
but
body for the first time in history.
no, this is just going to be
Gravity
an atmospheric electronic album?
flew into space.
At least that's where we're at so far.
All men of all nations recognize this as a great achievement. In an age where the race to conquer space has become an all-absorbing factor.
That's like a classic 80s synth tone right there. Feels very future facing. It's kind of bouncing around the sound sphere too.
The era of man's cosmic existence.
Will the bleep of the satellite bring people closer together in a common understanding? Or as the Earth shrinks, the universe stretches forth its beckoning hand in a gesture to all mankind.
Yeah, very determined. Very confident music. Very sure of itself. It took a while to get here, but it'll be a strong finish to the track here. Love the drums.
All mankind.
that dual rhythm idea was very disruptive. For a song that's been so consistently groovy, it's interesting for them to focus on such a rhythmic division as they did.
A new word to our vocabulary. Sputnik. Sputnik. Sputnik.
Hmm. Alright, we don't get too many electronic albums. Well, we don't get a lot of electronic music on the channel in general, but certainly not for album reviews. This is very nice. It's interesting though. I don't know how this happened again. Last week, we had two prog metal albums on the same day. Is this okay? The other album that we checked out, or that I checked out today, that you're welcome to view if you want, is Gazpacho's Demon. It's a post rock album. Focuses a lot on atmosphere. Not a lot of riffs in there. Slow burns of ideas. I mean, this may seem familiar if you just listen to this track. The track song must be a trong. It's a slow burn. It's a song that pretty much has, I'd say, three elements to it. We start small, we rise up big, we bring it back down. We start a new section, we rise up big, we bring it back down. We start a new section to wrap the song up. It's a series of rising and falling ideas, creating this pacing, this control of the emotion of the song, harmonically, volume wise, layering. It's just controlled exceptionally well with this slow burn technique of starting with the bare minimum and stacking layers on top, focusing more on atmosphere than any individual melody. The purpose, I think, is to create an emotional atmosphere for it, to create an emotional resonance for the listener, to kind of put them in a specific state of mind to hear the samples on. And I'm going to assume from this point on that this entire album is going to be sample based of speeches given during the race for space. The space race. That feels better to say. And I find that to be an interesting concept in general, but like I said, it does line up once again with my other album pick for this week. I say pick, I mean it's random. I just go to my random calculator and say, hey, there's 26 albums in the list, pick two. And it tossed me Public Service Broadcasting and Gazpacho, and they're, well, at least so far, they're both post-rock style. This is electronic, though. Oh, well, we do bring the drums in at the end. But it's still atmospherically driven, more so than melodically driven. If we continue on this album in the same vein as Sputnik, I wager we'll actually see quite a few parallels between this and Gazpacho's Demon, which is just, how does this keep happening? Alright. The song starts off with just quarter notes. And we get this warm, resonant lower tone that comes in around it. We get this syncopated, I don't know if I'd call it chirping, but a higher pitched synth tone. This is pretty much the foundation here. We have rhythm, we have foundation, we have counter rhythm in a sense. It's the syncopation that gives us the groove against the backbeat. We don't really have anything melodic, though. There are some memorable loops in here that I think work well at working with the atmosphere while also creating something that's not totally bland. I think that's an interesting line to walk here, where they're basically making film score music. They're making background music to add a musical emotional resonance to old speeches. The purpose is kind of like film score music, where you are engaging the audience on an emotional level on the audio, not necessarily trying to take attention away from the visual spectacle or cinematography that's going on, but it can't be silent either. The music must be noticeable. It must represent an emotion. It cannot be bland or forgettable, but it cannot be memorable either. This has a little bit of leeway with that. Film scores really typically do need to be pushed into the background a bit more than I think public service broadcasting is doing here. But a lot of that comes down to the fact that the music is what is key in a majority of the track. While we do have the speeches present at times, they're not constantly being played. And so that does create a lot of space where the music is the only thing happening. And so it is in the spotlight. It does need to have memorability to it. It does need to have melodic-ish ideas. It can't just be atmosphere. And so it walks this very, very thin line between background music and foreground music, if that was a thing. I don't think that term's ever been used, but I think I'm going to coin it if it hasn't been coined yet. Foreground music is just music that you're listening to attentively. It is your main focus of what you're doing at the moment. I don't think it's a great term, but it is the opposite of background music. So we're just going to go with that. Language. We don't have time to talk about language right now. We'll save that for the live stream. And like I said, it's a walking a very fine line here. It's difficult to do this. This is not a place I would envy being in. I would much rather write background music or foreground music, and I'm better at the foreground music, I think, anyways. Trying to figure out just how far you need to take your memorability and your grabbing of the listener's attention, I mean, that's not an easy thing to decide, and they did an excellent job of it just on this one track. I mean, we're only a quarter way through the album, but I mean, there's a lot ahead of us, but it's already on strong display here. They seem to have a vast understanding of not just what they're doing, but how they need to accomplish it. And they set out and did it excellently. And a lot of this, I think, comes down to a mixing of roles. Like I had mentioned, we have that backbeat idea at the very beginning of this, and then we have the syncopated, higher pitched synth. That synth bounces around between notes. It does have a melodic quality to it, but I kind of view it primarily from a syncopation point of view, the percussive and rhythmic side of it. And so through this, it creates the rhythmic groove. It's the syncopation. It's what makes the song dancey. But it also has a secondary component of being a bit more memorable with those syncopated hits. Boom, 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 ba-dum. Something like that. I think the first half of that was close. The back half wasn't, because I kind of went to like a salsa direction. I don't know. See, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's memorable enough that I can still hear it in my head, parts of it. Like, I have a general footprint of it, but it's not memorable enough for me to just sing it back after a single listen. It does that by being of two parts. And when I think back about a lot of the music going on in here, there is a lot of duality to it. Even when we get the proper drum kit at the end of the track, it is rhythmic. Sure, I mean, it's percussion instrument. Rhythm is what they do best, but it's also primarily drum fills against the electronic bass kick. The drum fills are creating syncopation. We do have grooviness out of this, but there's also a melodic element to the drum style going on too. This is something I'm going to be focusing on quite a bit going forward, particularly in the final track, as that's another 7-minute song, and track 6, which is 6.5. The other tracks are like 3 to 4 minutes. I don't know how we're going to explore those. We don't really have enough space to do what we did on Sputnik again, unless we just condensed it down, and then the slow burn's going to either feel like it's rushed or it takes too much of the song. So I'm interested to see where they take this on shorter run times. But here we have plenty of time to hear these ideas grow and evolve, and as they stack layers up, we begin to see more of these instruments taking on dual roles. And what this allows, like I mentioned earlier, is for we to have a primary role, which is the atmosphere. I think in every single section, you look at any specific instrument, and their primary role is emotional resonance. How are they adding to the song being more emotionally resonant? How does it expand the atmosphere of the track? There is one exception to this, the bass kick in the background that just gives us those quarter note hits. That, I don't know that that has too much emotional stuff to it. It's just an electronic bass kick. There are some more functional elements here. But aside from those, everything is built to extract emotion from the atmosphere. If they happen to do anything else, if they add to any sort of spiciness to the harmony, if they add any melodic elements, if they add even, I'd say, rhythmic syncopation, that even tends to be a bit more functional since it pulls on the dancey elements of electronic music. And I did find this track to be rather danceable. But all of that is secondary to the general atmosphere. And when you make that the focus, the song can very easily slip into background music to create an emotion for the listener to engage with while they hear this other stuff. If it happens to be melodic or rhythmic or extra harmonic, that's just icing on the cake. It's secondary. It's not in the spotlight. If you want to engage with that, you can, but if you don't want to, it functions very well as background music. And by relegating the extra elements that would bring spotlight to it as secondary components to the writing, it accentuates them and allows them to fade into the background with the atmosphere. I think that's what's going on. I'm going to have to listen to a couple more songs if they continue on with this writing and see if that hypothesis works. But from what I remember on the music, that was pretty consistent. And I think that's a phenomenal way to go about doing it, analyzing what your strengths need to be, what else you'd like to add to it, and to prioritize accordingly. Now, I do love their timbre work here as well. A lot of this is electronic, a lot of it just kind of sounds like synths to me, but the tones themselves of the instruments, I think, tell a story. Not all of them, I don't think, like the electronic bass kick, it's just a bass kick, it doesn't feel anything specific. But there was a point in here when we had a synth pop in, I guess it was around minute 3 or 4, and I was like, oh, this is like a stereotypical 80s synth pad right here. I like that, because that synth pad feels very futuristic to me, which is sort of odd because I think of it like 40 years in the past, it was a key thing, but so much of it just feels futuristic to me. It's that synthwave sound. Is that what it's called? Synthwave? I think so. It's always going to feel futuristic. It's always going to feel cyberpunk to me. And this, and bringing it up in this track, feels like taking a step into the future. What I think is further even more interesting is that it is a sound that wouldn't have been made for a couple of decades. Being that the space race was around the 60s, that sound would have gained popularity in the 80s. It's not just forward-facing in its placement in its pop culture when it was popular, but it's also forward-facing due to the time that these speeches were being made, because the sound wasn't available yet or wasn't widely used. It's a cool double layering of futuristicness on it, and even, like I said, bringing in my nostalgia for the sound as a sound of the future. I don't know if they put any of that thought into it. Honestly, it's just a cool tone. Maybe that's all they thought. Hey, I like this one. It fits the atmosphere. It's soft and round like everything else on the track. Maybe that's all the thought that went into it. But regardless, it's tones like that I think is really making this. It's a specific choice, much like the choir was on the first track. I'm actually kind of curious where the thought goes into a lot of these sounds. While some of it just sounds like electronic tone number 6 to me, I'm sure they mean stuff to public service broadcasting. I don't have a lot of experience with electronic sounds. I certainly don't know the history of electronic sounds. And for all I know, most of these sounds they could have borrowed from other songs. Maybe a different electronic artist really likes to use this specific snare drum sound, and so they're using it here because of the context of that person and what kind of music they've used it in, and all this stuff, right? Basically everything I said for that synthwave tone, but for maybe another tone. I don't have that kind of context on it. I don't have that kind of information or knowledge. So I'm curious if you hear anything in this where you can make those kind of connections, please let me know because I'd love to get a little bit more insight possibly into how public service broadcasting went about selecting the sounds that went on here. And I think that's going to wrap this one up. I guess technically I should talk about the emotion of this as much as I spoke about it. This one feels cautious. I think it's a beautiful turn from the opening, where the opening is almost bombastic. We will do this. It's the next obvious step. So confident that everything's going to turn out in their favor. And of course, the music subverts this a little bit with little bits of sorrow tossed in there, but it's also expansive and epic and overwhelmingly joyous about this monumental event. Sputnik, by contrast, is small. A lot of the tones themselves are small. The harmonies, while still having a bit of a spacey feeling to them, are more cautious. Maybe a cautious optimism would be the best term for it. It is still overall positive, but it's less, there's less bravado to it. It's more calculated. I think it's a cool turn. I'm curious what's going on in the speeches that's being paired with this. I mentioned a general rising and falling, an escalating and de-escalating of intensity, of volume, of layers. There was a moment towards the end when things got pretty tense. I don't know what the speech was saying at the time, but for me, it felt like all of this caution was for a good reason. Maybe we had thrown caution away for a moment, and what we were trying to avoid is happening here. I probably should know something more. Sputnik is a very popular spacecraft. Uh, I should already have some context for what this might mean, but I'm drawing a blank. I remember learning about Sputnik back in high school, but we're talking like 25 years ago. So, one of those things that really interested me at the time. I used to love learning about space, but over the years just hasn't been important enough to retain, I suppose. Let's look at some lyrics. It's weird to call them lyrics. This one I'm just going to keep saying now. Let's look at some lyrics. All right. This looks like not just one speech, but several. It brings up the moment when Sputnik was put into space. It was the first artificial satellite that was launched and worked and got to sit up there in our orbit. And all it did, apparently, was send beeps every 3 seconds or so that transmitted information like temperature and stuff like that. It seems that people could just tune into this. Maybe there was a radio station or there was television, right? I was also a little off. I said the mid 60s. It looks like this was 1957. So, late 50s. But we have a line here. This is the beginning of a new era for mankind, the era of man's cosmic existence. I love that on so many levels. One, because cosmic just kind of means something different to me, despite being of the cosmos, which is its like literal definition. Cosmic is kind of like awesome. It's like a big way to describe something. But also because I mean, Earth is in the cosmos, right? Haven't we've always been part of a cosmic existence in a way? I don't know. That line's fun. It says you will now hear the voice of the Russian moon. From here, it takes some of that beeping, that Sputnik broadcast, and uses it as the beat for the song. This is very cool. And it solidifies something that I was talking about, which is a conscious choice to pick these sounds. I didn't think we were going to go in this direction. I thought we were going to stick in the realm of music. But no, they've incorporated the historic moments and sounds of this moment into their music today. That's just awesome. The first verse says, all over the world, people are tuning into the bleep bleep of the satellite. Verse 2, a dream cherished by man for many centuries comes true. The man-made celestial body, for the first time in history, overcame terrestrial gravity and flew into space. I love the vocabulary here. I'd love to know where this came from, who said this. It carries so much weight and import to it. It says, all men of all nations recognize this as a great achievement in an age where the race to conquer space has become an all-absorbing factor. I think this is interesting, and the annotation lines up with my thoughts too. It says all men of all nations recognize this as a great achievement. I think that's true in a sense. As I was talking about, this, the space race was awesome for all of humanity. But I think the repercussions of Russia, or the USSR at the time, getting their satellite out there first was something that people feared. And you can actually find, thanks to the this annotator here, who left a picture of a copy of the front page of the New York Times about it. And it says that people were a bit scared of it. What could it do? If they could send this into space, what could they send over to us? All of this kind of stuff. A lot of fear about, I don't know, space lasers and stuff. I don't know what the actual fears were, and I'm sure some of it was just overblown stuff as well, but the idea that they have their technology in space, what could they do with it? There's a duality to that, I suppose. It is awesome to see that humans have escaped Earth, but there's also the political climate as well. Verse 3 leans into this a bit and even says, will the bleep of the satellite bring people closer together in a common understanding? It questions that. What is the future of this? The outro simply states, we've added a new word to our vocabulary, Sputnik, which somebody translated in Russian is fellow traveler. That's pretty cool. So, talking about the song, it's very cautious. One thing that was noted here too, was it this one? Yeah, it says that due to Sputnik going up into space, the U.S. rushed their Vanguard project with a December 57 launch. The rocket infamously exploded on the launch pad. It wasn't until January the next month that the U.S. put Explorer 1, its own first satellite, into orbit. There's definitely an element of fear in here, and I think that's where the ending of the song comes in. I mentioned that we've had a cautiousness to the entire track. It's a very measured song musically until we get to the end, and this is where harmonically we introduce more tension, more danger. If we view this song from a Western point of view, particularly maybe even the US's point of view, seeing Sputnik go up into space, there's a lot of joy in that middle part of the song, anticipation. There's an expansive element that kind of talks about the infinite possibilities that we now can, look at. The first task, the hardest part, getting something off this rock into space, is complete. The only thing holding us back now is ourselves. Let's go to the stars next, right? It feels like a massive breakthrough. I think the song captures that very well, but towards the end of the song, there's a lot of tension and dissonance coming in. It's a heavier part of the song for a brief moment. I wonder if that is the fears of particularly the US, having seen them lose the start of this race to slip behind. It might also have even been, well, no, I was going to say it might have been the Vanguard explosion, but I don't really think that that's part of the song at all. That's extra context to it. The song doesn't focus on that at all. So yeah, I think it would just represent some of the fears of this massive achievement. All right, we're going to move on then. Probably look at 2 tracks here. Every time I say that, we end up only looking at 1. Sometimes you just listen to the music and you're like, I can't wait to talk about this. That's me a lot. Yeah, let's just dive into this next one, see where Gagarin takes us. I'm sorry, excuse me?
This is Moscow Chord. On the 12th of April, the Soviet Union orbited a spaceship around the Earth with a man on board. The astronaut is a Soviet citizen, Major Gagarin Yuri Alexeyevich.
Oh, yeah, dude, this is good.
Gagarin Yuri Alexeyevich.
Oh, the sforzando on the trumpet,
The first to open
funky
the door
syncopated
into the
guitar and
unknown.
bass work.
The first to step over the threshold of our homeland.
Gagarin Yuri Alexeyevich.
The whole planet knew him and loved him.
Gagarin.
So crisp.
Was it hazardous? Yes, it was.
Oh, the harmony
The
on
first
that.
strides into the unknown were about to be made.
Gagarin Yuri Alexeyevich.
The hero who blazed the trail to the stars.
Every one of us was with Yuri Gagarin as he orbited the Earth 190 miles above us.
See, even talking about the idea of like background music, we are doing a lot of repetition on this.
Everything's so beautiful. It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Dude, that, oh, the explosive note. That trumpet player, man.
The whole planet knew him and loved him.
Gagarin.
What'd I tell you? What'd I tell you? Every time I say we might group two together, we don't. It has to be off the cuff. Just like, oh, that song was okay. I don't have a lot to say. Let's go into the next. If I say we're going to group them, it never happens. Because bands throw stuff like this at me. Man, just completely shifting the formula. Well, completely shifting might be the wrong. We shifted gears. The formula is the same. What we get at the beginning of the song is pretty much what we get in the middle of the song. It's also what we get at the end of the song. Unfortunately, it's also, I think, its weakest element. You may have noticed I was pretty on board with it for the first minute, and by the end, I'm just kind of like unenthusiastically nodding my head to it. It's a fantastic idea. Absolutely gorgeous jazz fusion playing right here, and writing even. I mean, this is infectious on so many levels. And it gets massively overplayed. They do make attempts to create contrast in here. I don't think they're enough. But let's start with the good. And by good, I mean great. By great, I mean excellent. This song comes in and just lets you know it's a party. We got these trumpets blasting. So good, man. It comes in so strong. The drums come in with a lot of power. Very rock style. We got some jazzy syncopation going on in here, but the way that they're being played, it is in your face rock. And this is where the jazz fusion comes from a little bit. I think if the drums were a bit lighter, we could probably put this into a pretty straightforward big band idea. I think the guitar might have to be changed up just a tad bit. But the drums, the percussive elements of this all over the place is what really cements it, for me anyways, in the realm of rock, which gives us that jazz fusion genre. Dude, the funky syncopated guitar work in here right from the start gives us this heavy groove. The drums go along with it to really create this strong syncopation against the backbeat. The bass has given us some very cool bass lines, somewhere between walking and rhythmic. It isn't purely walking. Usually a walking bass line is just quarter notes, ba-dum, boom, 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 boom. Some sort of outlining of or shaping of a chord, usually with rising and falling patterns. They lead rhythmically, they give you the beat, and they shape out the chords, they give you harmonic information. In a lot of jazz settings, the bassist is the leader of the band. They even present more rhythmic information, I think, than the drums, which kind of, the drummer usually in like big bands, jazz situations, is going to be more of a rhythmic accentuation. They're going to give you the syncopation and everything, but your bassist is going to give you the groove. They're going to give you the tempo. They're going to lead the band that way, as well as harmonically. We get a little bit of that walking bass line idea, but is some syncopation to it. It isn't just a series of quarter notes, and it isn't always walking up and down. Sometimes it sits on a note, creating a bit of a pedal tone for a moment. It's expressive. It's not necessarily as monotonous as rock bass can be, especially modern rock bass, but it isn't as leadership positioned as jazz tends to be either. It's sort of walking its own road, going down its own trail here, finding a middle point between the two. I think that's pretty cool. It creates something that feels a little unique to me. And this is it, right? We were talking about Sputnik and how I found that the lead synth line was memorable enough to kind of get fragments of it in my mind, but not ridiculously memorable that I could sing it after a single listen. The trumpets here are full on foreground music. It is so infectious listening to them. You got the bass line going, you got the syncopation on the guitars. They're creating a lot of groove with the drums. The trumpets give you these accented hits every once in a while. Ba bum, ba da ba da bow. You You get those two little stingers, and then you get at the end a little punctuating idea to bring you back to the beginning of the loop. It is very catchy. It is very memorable. It is kind of like everything else, a little cliche. I think that they're definitely working within these traditional vibes here in order to maximize the emotional resonance by using sounds and writing that is very familiar to a specific style. It is, I think, exceptionally effective. To write 9 songs that are totally new and unique while still trying to capture the vibes of these specific feelings and capturing these, even the genre shifts, trying to capture all of them, I think it would just end up being a bit of a mess and more work than would be necessary. It might even be a bit of a detriment. I think this is one of the cases where iterative writing absolutely is the right way to go. Not just on a skill level, for all I know, they could absolutely write something brand new within any of these genres. But like I said, for the emotional resonance, this is supposed to be something that I think, like I mentioned, if they had put more work into it and tried to create something brand new, I think it would have been less effective. This is definitely a case of working smarter, not harder. Everything in here, as far as I can see so far in this opening, 12, 13 minutes, is what needed to happen, what this album needed to accomplish its goals. This is a party. This is fun. It feels very 60s, very 70s. It's just so upbeat and catchy and infectious and fiery, and the trumpets. Oh my god, can we talk about them for a second? I really hope that this group, I have a picture of them on Spotify. Looks like there's 4 people in the band. Other than that, I don't know anything about them. For the first 2 tracks, I figured, yeah, maybe it's all synth work. At this point, I really hope it isn't. Everything here can be a real instrument. And if any of these people play trumpet and they can play it like this, I am in awe. It is crisp, it is clean, and the thing that gets me is it is exact. A little thing about the trumpet. Y'all have maybe seen bugles, basically trumpets with no valves, right? You might think of like U.S. military, maybe even, well, I guess a lot of Western military might have bugles. Um, but the thing is that you can change the pitch based on your embouchure, based on the muscles of your lips. And so you can actually create a lot of different pitches across a wide range without actually having any way to change the notes with your fingers. This was the basis for, I think it was the bugle. Fast forward today, we have 3-valve trumpets, and you can change the notes by pushing down any combination of the valves. But even without that, and even with it, there's still a lot of fluctuation of the embouchure. For instance, within the staff, which is the lines where the notes are put in sheet music, as long as you're within that, if you don't push any valves down, you can hit the low C, the mid G, the higher C, and the E above that. And once we go above the staff, there's just a lot of notes, and actually once you get an octave higher, I think you can hit all of the notes just by changing your embouchure, although it's a bit more difficult, and it's probably easier to use the valves. What I'm getting at is that you can play a lot of notes without actually moving, without actually changing things. But once you get into these higher range notes that we hear here, a lot of it's embouchure. It's not really so much finger work anymore. It's actually funny. Once you get above the staff, C is open, D is 1, E is open, F is 1, G is open. A is 1 and 2, B is just 2, and C is open again. And that's just for your C major scale. A lot of it's just 1 and open. You're doing a lot of it with your embouchure, which means you really need to, when playing some of these higher notes, have a lot of strength and control over these muscles. And I'll tell you, it's very tiring. But what I'm getting at here, what I brought all this up for, is that with these higher notes, the precision of them, not just to hit the notes, which is impressive on its own, with the power, the force behind it, and the air pressure to support all of it at this volume that they're playing at. But the fact that so many times a note is being hit from pure silence, and that note is probably the same valve combination as like 3 other notes around it too, and to just hit it perfectly every time with that precision and not overshoot it, not undershoot it. It's impressive. I think even range wise, at my peak, I don't think I would have been able to hit the 2 highest notes that this trumpet player does. I don't know that I would have had the precision on them either. It's just, it was at the end of the song, and he hit this note, and I was like, dang, that's just. And that's why I sort of kind of hope that this is not digital. I suppose there are sound libraries out there that would capture this very well, seeing as the trumpet sounds are pretty much all staccato, very short sounds. We don't really have anything that's held out in any way. It's very, I'm not going to say it's very, it is easier to create a library that's close to this than trying to create a library that's held out trumpet notes and make it sound real. There's a part of my gut that thinks this is a library. There's a lot of very perfect elements about it that I think a human could do, but it's one of those places, sort of like with pitch correction, where it's just too perfect, and you're like, oh, that's been pitch corrected or auto tuned. If you're usually a bit on the older side, everything's auto tuned. Oh, that was the buzz. It still is the buzzer. I know Gen Xers use auto tune just as a blanket term for any pitch correction. Anyways, yeah, it's just one of those things where I hear it, I'm like, there's a lot of perfect stuff going on. Maybe it's digital. But I kind of hope it isn't, because if not, this is just a ridiculous display of skill. That's just the composition side of things. I love the way everything lines up. Otherwise, though, everything else is sort of production. I mentioned that the composition doesn't really change. That's true. There is an A and like a variation on A that we sort of bounce back and forth between to create a little bit of contrast in the composition, but to me it's not a very strong one. The way that the song changes in larger ways, though, I think is production, of kind of pocketing the trumpets down into the corner for a little bit, bringing their power and volume down, hitting those notes while quiet too. I mean, that's tough. We had some harmonies at times. That's more on the compositional side, but it still changes the way it sounds. And that's really about it. A little bit of control of the way that it sounds over time. It doesn't really create something that I think evolves in any way. It just modifies itself on a couple of parameters over time. It is why much as I love the first third, it kind of loses me after the halfway point. I would have just liked more. Give me a different rhythm, give me a different melody, give me throw a different instrument in there. Get rid of the trumpets for a minute. Give me a sax solo or something. Give me a trumpet solo. Hell, just do that. Like, I don't know, just some sort of compositional contrast, I think, would have really helped that. Keep it staying power. Maybe that's the purpose of it, though. This is like where I always come at things. If I find things didn't work for me, my first question is why? Is it a me thing, or is it a them thing? Or is it somewhere in the middle? This one I do think it's a little bit in the middle. We do continue on with this post-rock idea of creating a textured soundscape and fully exploring it. In this case, the textured soundscape is a little bit more melodic than I expected, but it's still, that's it. You get the texture, and we'll explore that in a little bit. We'll change things up a little bit here and there, but we're really not going to be changing that idea in any large ways. We're not going to be moving to a completely different atmosphere or a completely different melody or anything like that. So part of it, I think, is just me. This type of hyper repetition isn't usually my cup of tea, and I was caught off guard by the super catchy beginning and forgot that the other two tracks were very much the same thing and that this would probably fall in a similar line. But I do wonder if it is purposeful. The energy of the song does dwindle over the course of the track. Part of that is in the reduction of the trumpet prominence, part of that is in a volume reduction, part of that I even think is some sort of effect that sort of makes the sound feel smaller. Not necessarily a volume thing, just kind of compressing in on all sides. Maybe they're trying to represent a diminished excitement. Let's read the lyrics and find out. Alright, and this one is about Yuri Gagarin, who was the first human to go into orbit. Says the very beginning, this is Moscow calling. On the 12th of April, the Soviet Union orbited a spaceship around the Earth with a man on board. The astronaut is a Soviet citizen. This is pretty cool. See, the first person to open the door into the unknown, the first step over the threshold of our homeland. Says the whole planet knew him and loved him. This is another interesting line. It mentions that the annotation mentions that President Kennedy acknowledged and congratulated the Soviets on their accomplishment, and that the news dealt a blow to public spirit in the U.S. With the Cold War going on, there was a bit of hostility to this, but I do like the fact that our president was like, hey, good job, guys. There's sportsmanship to it. Part of it is the heated politics between the two countries, but there's also, there's also, it almost seems like it was a friendly race at times. That's probably maybe just the public perception of it in specific areas. There probably was more of an intense crisis over this, especially with the Cold War coming into play. But, a public display like that, I think, is a really nice gesture. Makes it feel like a true race, a sport, rather than something with cataclysmic repercussions if we don't win kind of idea. So that's another line that I find really interesting in here. The whole planet knew and loved him. It says, was it hazardous? Yes, but it was worthwhile. This is the hero who blazed the trail for the stars. It says every one of us was with Yuri Gagarin as he orbited the Earth 190 miles above us. It cuts to him. He says, I can see forests, rivers, cumulus clouds all around. It's so beautiful. It's wonderful. And then there's a transmission from him that is not transcribed into the lyrics. So I think that's interesting. It's a very celebratory moment, though. It's the first time we sent a human into space. The music makes sense. I still don't really understand the diminished feeling of excitement over the course of the track, but much like track 2, it could just be a reflection onto some of the hidden fears of the US and maybe their confidence beginning to become diminished a bit. Particularly, though, it seems that this entire album so far hasn't really been focused too much on the rivalry between the USSR and the US, as much as just the accomplishments of humanity as a whole. So maybe my read on the end of Sputnik and the end of Gagarin are not accurate. I don't know. We're going to go into Fire in the Cockpit, though, see what happens here. makes me think about the sounds that they're using. It sounds like some sort of radar pinging. Does that have anything of reference? It's tense. The white noise is like static, which can feel isolating if your only connection to humanity is, a radio call.
Astronauts Virgil I. Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee were killed tonight in a flash fire during tests of the Apollo Saturn 204 vehicle at Cape Kennedy. The fire occurred while the astronauts were in the spacecraft during the countdown of a simulated flight test. The accident occurred at 5:31 Houston time, or at T-minus 10 minutes prior to the planned simulated liftoff. The spacecraft was atop the Saturn launch vehicle some 218 feet above the launch pad. The hatches on the spacecraft had been closed. Emergency crews were hampered by dense smoke in removing the hatches, and an unknown number of launch crew workers was treated for smoke inhalation at the Cape Kennedy dispensary. The crew had entered the spacecraft at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Minor difficulties had been encountered during the countdown. Difficulties with the environmental control system and the communication system. All recorded data has been impounded pending an investigation into the accident that claimed the lives of astronauts Grissom, White, and Chaffee.
Well, that's an effective track. I think that's the first time I've listened to it the way that public service broadcasting probably intends for this album to be listened to. It's the first time I paid a lot of attention towards the spoken word samples. The song is about a fire that occurred during a simulated launch that happened in the cockpit and I believe killed everyone in the ship, or at least everyone in the cockpit of the ship, which should have been everybody. I didn't catch the name of the ship. It was an Apollo, so we're looking at a US ship. The beginning of the song, a heavy weight, the white noise rising, the tension peaking and then dissipating, never going away completely, coming back again. The waves of distress mixed with just a very somber, almost melancholic chord progression. It's a song of heavy weight. It stands in stark contrast to the last song, which was celebratory. It's a heavy moment. It's the first tragedy on the album. Or I should say, the first tragedy that the album covers. I don't really have much else to say about it. It is simple, it is effective. The delivery of this message mixed with the white noise, like chord progression and the minimal composition, is just very effective at creating a sobering remembrance, sobering tale of this event. But I have questions that I hope the rest of this album answers regarding the order of events and what is being specifically focused on here. I figured with some of the language going on in the race for space, Sputnik, and Gagarin, that this was going to be an album that celebrates the victories of humanity's escape from Earth's gravity. I still think it's leading into that direction. The Other Side, I'm kind of expecting to be a song about crossing some sort of threshold. Go and Tomorrow are going to wrap this album up. Both of those feel like they are, full hearted uh, commands and a positive look at tomorrow's space race, how we might continue to explore the stars. Looking at the past, exploring it, and looking then to the future. I'm not sure what E.V.A. is or Valentina. Either one of those, I suppose, could be a bit of a heavier track. But we have two songs celebrating Russian victories, and then a song focusing on an American tragedy. And this is very interesting to view this back to back. I suppose if we take this in if we view this through the lens of The Race for Space, the opening song, I had mentioned that it was a very optimistic atmosphere, constantly looking at expansive chords that, at least to me, read about the expansive and vastness of space, and pairing it with the positivity and optimism for getting out there and exploring it ourselves. But there were tinges of sorrow in there, and I had mentioned that I was thinking it would be foreshadowing to some of the tragedies, some of the failures that have happened along the way. It makes sense to have a track like this in here. I just find the narrative of the album interesting so far. I don't have anything to add to that. I want to get a few more tracks in. In fact, I might not even say anything about it until we wrap the album up and I can see what their full story is, the scope of what they were doing, and maybe having a bit of insight into their intentions. This could just be the first victory and one of the first big failures back to back. Just creating a timeline of things. I don't know. This song hit though. It hits hard. Makes me wonder if I shouldn't listen to more of the songs like this, though I think Sputnik had enough musical ideas in it to warrant a bit more of a critical listen, and Gagarin was just a blast. I just enjoyed it. I didn't listen to the words at all. I love the musicality of it. From that perspective, it probably was a smart decision to simplify this a bit, go a bit more minimalistic in layers, to put a hyper focus on words and an emotion rather than trying to work with layers. Spotlight the important things and make it no frills, which is honestly the way any message of loss should be delivered. no frills. It works on a lot of levels. It's definitely the way to go, and it is a gut punch after track 3. Maybe just that progression of ideas, allowing contrast to make this one hit harder, was the main driving decision behind putting this one next. I don't know. I don't need to hit lyrics on this one. We've already sort of discussed how all the samples and music work together. Let's check out what E.V.A. is and where public service broadcasting takes us next.
And now, a new breakthrough in space conquests. For the first time, the spaceman has to leave the ship.
That's also a
and
little
step out
awkward.
into open space.
4 whole seconds
The
of
first one
silence.
to do this was
I mean, it's
Alex
really
de
difficult to
Leon.
follow up. Fire in the cockpit.
Everything is ready. Let's go.
See, like, I know in my mind this is a fun song. There's a lot of cool
Everything is
ideas.
strange and
I'm not in the
unusual
mood for it right now. I'm still
There's no
very
support.
down from track 4.
No top, no bottom. Everything is weightless. Everything is weightless. Orientation is lost. The vacuum is dangerous. The vacuum is dangerous.
Nice bit of wonder right here.
I'm on the edge of the opening of the airlock chamber. I feel excellent. I see clouds and the sea. I'm beginning to move away. Man in space. He's walking in space. He's walking in space.
With no support, no top, no bottom. Everything is weightless.
He's walking in space.
I like that synth.
He's walking in space.
It's very ethereal. It feels hollow. It feels very light. It matches this idea of being weightless in space.
10 minutes in open space. 10 minutes that shook the world.
Yeah, I think in a vacuum, that song is fantastic. It's very light. It's very dexterous. It captures a lot of that groove, that anticipatory groove that we saw on track 3. Less over the top though. Less party dance mode and more giddy energy kind of idea. It captures a type of anticipation, positive hope, and at the peak of this leads into a sense of wonder. Around this time, samples were talking about having somebody walking outside of the spacecraft, or they said they were walking in space. Maybe they were on the moon. I don't know. And some audio feed of them saying that there's no weight, there's no top, there's no bottom, just kind of there, no sense of gravity. And around this time, we had that synth tone come in that I kind of described as hollow and ethereal, weightless, very light sound. I think this whole thing works really well at crafting something that feels energetic, feels optimistic, almost feels childlike at times. Even at once, like I mentioned, setting into a very solid sense of wonder, a feeling of being in awe of something. It does a fantastic job, I think, of capturing first time feeling of being in space. All of the new views, the new feelings, the new way your body just works. A shift in gravity, I'm sure, is wild. I have spent 30 some odd years in the same, the same sense of gravity, the same sense of weight. It would be absolutely wild to be on a different planet or a different moon and feeling a different element of weight, especially one of lightness. Being on the moon's lower gravity or being out in space's zero gravity, I think I'd be a kid, man. You ever been to like a trampoline park? Or just been on your own big trampoline, I guess? And just the joy of being so high off the ground? Even as an adult, I find it to be a thrill. To be able to do that without feeling the ground, the trampoline have to give way and bounce you back up just to jump like that on the moon. I think that would be overwhelming. I would turn into a kid on the spot. I really would. I think this song captures a lot of that energy very well. But it does so in a very dancey way. There's a lot of syncopation in here. There's a lot of percussive rhythmic ideas, not even just in the percussion instruments, but even in the main synth, kind of has like a piano vibe to it. From the very beginning, it's very light. And I feel like as the song goes on, it gets more and more danceable. The syncopations get heavier and more infectious. The melodies, they just start to get stuck in your head. The ways that 2 or 3 different rhythmic ideas can sort of create this hocketed melody. You kind of hear all the different parts together and it forms this melodic idea on top of everything. And it just gets stuck in your head, working in that same middle ground between background and foreground music that Sputnik did. Where there is something melodic, I can still vaguely hear it, but it's not like Gagarin where I can, sing it back to you. I could be close, but it's going to be wrong. But I don't get the pacing of the album. Like I had mentioned, Fire in the Cockpit ends on a massive downer. It is a low point of the album, not in effort or artistic integrity, but just in emotional weight and impact. I think the album has done a great job of showcasing victory and optimism and uh, positive thoughts about the future. Why can't I think of what that word is? Hopefulness, maybe, and a general state of awe and wonder of what's beyond our atmosphere. Out of nowhere, after the most victorious party song, we have Fire in the Cockpit. And it is a gut punch of the travesties and I guess the real danger of all of this, right? Taking a rocket into space is not safe, especially not at the time, you know? There have been so many rockets that blew up or had failures or didn't make it back in one piece and all sorts of stuff that, even being the first man into space, that must have been a most harrowing experience for Yuri. I mean, just I can't imagine that there that the safety or the failure rate was anything above like 60% or something. I mean, it was just like, hey, things look all right. You want to try this? Not like, we've tested everything and there's, it's completely foolproof, almost like it is now. I mean, we've had decades upon decades, not to make it 100% safe, but we have way more safe ventures into space and back than they did back then. It's a dangerous race that they were in, and I think Fire in the Cockpit is a very sobering moment in the album and probably in real life. Kind of seeing the dangers of this and how it's not all optimism and positivity. It's, it is a dangerous thing. And then out of that, we get 2 seconds of silence, and then the sample says something like, "We've made great breakthroughs into this," and then a dance beat comes in, and then the song's upbeat and chipper, and I'm not yet. I'm still devastated. I'm not ready for the album to move on. I got into the song a little bit more as it was going in. Like I said, it's a fine song. It's infectious. It gets stuck in your head. But it's like listening to the most catchy earworm in the world when you're depressed. Yeah, it's going to get stuck in your head, but that doesn't mean you want to listen to it. It's kind of making things worse. I don't know. I don't like I said though, I don't know how you follow up track 4. I really don't. There's just no way to come off of that without letting it completely infect the rest of the emotional weight of the album. You would need at least one more track to kind of scoop us out of that. A song about refinding hope and inspiration through loss. Musically, this song didn't do that. And so I feel like I was on a spaceship and I was not ready, and they hit the launch button, and I'm just thrust into this next feeling. I'm just not mentally here for it. So I'm torn on this one. I think in execution is fantastic. I don't really have any negative notes for the song itself. I just I don't know why it had to come so quickly after Fire in the Cockpit. I didn't pick up all the lyrics for this one. Let me look at that real quick. Alright, EVA is an acronym. I knew that, there's periods in there, but it stands for extravehicular activity. Doing anything outside of your spacecraft. This song was about the very first person to do the spacewalk, Alexei Leonov. He talks about it being strange and unusual with no top, no bottom, everything is weightless, and orientation is lost. Talks about being on the edge of the airlock chamber and just feeling excellent, seeing the clouds and the sea. Describes himself as a man in space. says 10 minutes in open space, 10 minutes that shock the world. That's pretty awesome. I would like to know a timeline of all this. Because, again, the highs and lows of the album are interesting. But if this is just supposed to be a chronological delivery of historic moments during the space race, that would make a little more sense. But at this point, once again, we have 3 songs about Russian victories and 1 song about an American failure, and it still feels kind of odd. If this is just how history went, that's fine. I guess that's just the way. I don't know. I don't know. Let's just continue on, I suppose. Track 6, The Other Side.
Apollo Control, Houston, 2 minutes, 50 seconds away from time of LOS now. Our distance away from the moon, 460 nautical miles. Velocity, 7417 feet per second. Here in Mission Control, we're standing by. There's certainly a great deal of anxiety at this moment. We acquire at 36 minutes. So at 68 hours, 55 minutes, continuing to monitor. This is Apollo Control. So at this time, we're going to stand by and continue to monitor the loops here in Mission Control for our go, no-go decision.
Lots of anticipation right here. Not sure where this is going to go, but I am ready for it.
1 minute, 30 seconds away now from loss of signal. Our distance away from the moon now, 401 nautical miles. Velocity reading 7535 as we continue with this flight of Apollo 8.
Oh, I was going to say, is this like Apollo 8 or 9? Those were the first 2 that America launched that orbited the moon. I didn't know that originally. That's part of the what I've been reading about alongside this journey through this album.
Our flight control team here in Mission Control has examined the data and it looks good. So we have a combined crew ground decision. We are go, repeat, go.
You know what this feels like?
This
is like the sonic equivalent of a fresh day. Does that make any sense? Like the idea of a brand new day. Yesterday was trash, but today has possibility to it. I don't know why the music feels like that to me.
Apollo 8, 10 seconds to go. Your go all the way.
Roger. Thanks a lot, troops. See you on the other side.
We've had loss of a signal with Apollo 8 at 68 hours, 58 minutes, 45 seconds. We will watch with continuing interest the AOS clock here in Mission Control. They're traveling over the backside of the moon now. Our velocity reading here, 7777 feet per second. Now we're in our period of longest wait. Continuing to monitor. This is Apollo Control, Houston.
This is a good track.
Apollo Control, Houston. We've acquired signal, but no voice contact yet. We're standing by. We're looking at engine data, and it looks good. Tank pressures look good.
Apollo 8, this is Houston, over.
Roger, Houston, we read you loud and clear. How do you read us?
We've got it. Apollo 8 now in lunar orbit. There's a cheer in this room. This is Apollo Control, Houston. Switching now to the voice of Jim Lovell.
560.5, good to hear your voice.
Keeps getting bigger. I thought it was already pretty loud when it began to drown out the sample.
The unmanned lunar orbiter spacecraft traversed the moon perhaps over 10,000 times, but this is the first that a man aboard reported to his compatriots here on Earth.
Yeah, that's a nice song. Once again, it's a bit on the simpler side. I don't think this analysis is going to be very lengthy. It is a song built on anticipation. Everything in it feels like it is building up towards something. Every new layer, every new harmonic component is tension, subtle tension. It's not like we're building anything dissonant here. It's all fairly consonant, but it all wants to resolve home. It doesn't really get a chance to, though. We add more and more layers to it until we hit like minute 2.5 or 3 or something like that. And then the music cuts out entirely. We're left in this suspended state here. Our minds a little left floating. We wanted that resolve in the harmony, and we didn't get it. Now we're just left wondering what's next. The song allows us to wait for quite some time with some rising white noise on the outskirts, just to really lean into more of a tense feeling, as if the walls are closing in. Time is running out. Before an explosion of optimism and relief and release and joy and victory, and all of this wrapped up into one, as if for an extended amount of time we had been holding our breath waiting for something to happen, and now we can release it. The walls are no longer closing in, the space has opened up. We took a deep breath in and released it. All is right now. Musical release, tension release, sonic release, all of it well done, narrative driven, musical atmosphere. I love it. It's great. And it lines up with what's being said in the sample as well. This was the base on Earth talking to the members of the Apollo spacecraft as they were orbiting around the moon, and as the moon was between the ship and the base on Earth, nothing could no signal could be relayed, no communication. And so the anticipation of the beginning of the song is the blackout. It's going to be a tense few moments. What if something happens? And so there's all this building tension, and then nothing. The signal drops. No more communication. I love how the music cuts out there, just as if the radio would also cut out any static or anything like that on both sides. Just emptiness, silence for both the people on Earth and the people on the spacecraft. The music, I think, captures all of this. The feelings of nerves going up until this moment and the rising tension of silence during the moment. And of course, the relief when they say, Apollo, can you hear us? And Apollo says, yes, can you hear us? And I even heard a little bit of what sounded like the room erupting into cheers in the sample, which I thought was kind of cool. And, from here, though, we just have this rising power, this real warm sound continuing to grow in size and in volume. It eventually consumes the sample and it continues to get louder. I thought we had reached peak volume and we didn't. It just kept getting louder until the last 10 seconds when it kind of peters out and has a nice fade out to wrap the song up. I like this. It's celebration, it's joy, it's victory. Unbound. It doesn't matter that we have a mission that we need to continue to communicate. Right now, we won, we succeeded, we did it. The task is complete. It was scary, but everything worked. And sometimes that's going to drown out, the need to continue on for a moment. I love how that sort of just kind of drowns out what the sample is saying. At that moment, words don't capture what's felt. And I think sometimes just portraying the emotion is the right way to go about it. Yeah. You know what I like about this album so far, though? It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's simple. That's not to mean that it isn't complex. This album has had some very complex ideas on it, but it never really aims for emotional complexity. If a song is about energy, if it's about victory, if it's about an accomplishment, if it's about sorrow, if it's about tragedy, it just wears that emotion on its sleeve. The atmosphere leans into that 100%. It doesn't care how obvious it is. It doesn't care how campy or trite the musical representation of that emotion is. It just showcases it. And when you pair that with the samples, you tend to get something exceptionally effective, whether you feel the joy of it or you get brought down into the tragedy. The album does a great job of understanding what's necessary to achieve its goals and running with that. Never letting, ambition maybe cloud up intention. Could we create, or could they have created this album with more complex composition? Sure. Like I said earlier, though, I think that might have worked against a lot of what they're doing here. They knew exactly what tools they needed for the job and used them, not trying to overcomplicate anything. This is an album that I get on a first time. I don't think any of these songs have gone over my head in any way, and I think they've created fantastic, again, film score music for these events. it's quite spectacular at just how effective many of these songs are, and getting me to immediately understand what they're about. I do want to look at the lyrics for this just in case I missed something, but I've already talked about how what I understood to be happening lined up with the music. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any important details, and I do want to look a little bit into the Apollo 8 event journey and see if there's anything interesting there that I might be able to pair back into the music. Yeah, there was nothing there. I thought that would really add to anything, so we're going to push forward into Valentina. Let's see what's going on here. The acoustic drum set here has reminded me that I still don't know interesting use of voices. I still don't know what kind of music public service broadcasting makes. Atmospheric, sure. Sometimes it's rock, sometimes it's jazz. There's been a couple of electronic tracks. Maybe they're just varied in their instrumentals. What kind of sounds they use. It's very calming though, in an album that has been filled with extremes, positive and negative. Just chill is something we haven't really seen much of. The building melodies out of outlining chords with a twinkly, bright guitar feels very Midwest emo. Yeah, even without all of the melodic layers, it's still just very relaxing. Except that point, it was kind of tense. Not sure what's going on there. I love this really warm kind of sliding into that. And it's always an uplift too. I think that's something that keeps it feeling. That's something that keeps it feeling positive throughout. Yeah, I think we're going to run into the next track here. I don't have much to say on Valentina other than it's just very chill and calming. I am curious what this lull is in the album, though. Like I said, everything's been an extreme of joy or despair or victory, intensity, even. And here it's just relaxing. Like laying in an ocean, just staring up at the sky. I anticipate both of these to be rather high energy, though. Just the word go! And then tomorrow, I think both are about the possibilities of the future and striving for them. This is already upbeat.
This is Apollo Control at 102 hours into the flight of Apollo 11. It's grown quite quiet here in Mission Control. A few moments ago, Flight Director Gene Kranz requested that everyone sit down, get prepared for events that are coming. And he closed with the remark,
of course,
"Good luck
we're going to
all of
wrap
you."
the album up with Apollo 11. First landing on Mars, right?
Minutes now until ignition for powered descent. Everything's still looking very good at this point.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for powered descent. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. Jinsey, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go.
I know there's been some
Capcom,
slight
we're go for
manipulation
powered
to make
descent.
things line up. Particularly, I remember the
We're off to a good start.
President's speech,
Play it cool.
Kennedy, in track 1, kind of pausing so that it would always line back up on beat 1. But I don't think we've ever heard anything like this that really makes it a part of the music. That was fun.
Okay, all flight controllers, I'm going around the horn. Okay, retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control,
This is so
go.
good.
Telcom, go. Jinsey, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. Jinsey, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for landing. Okay, everybody, let's hang tight and look for landing radar.
75 feet, down a half. 1202 alarm. 60 seconds. We're going that flag.
We're going that alarm.
40 feet, down 2.5. If it does reoccur, will we go? 30 seconds. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm.
Same time, we'll go, flight.
Okay, we're go. We've had shutdown.
I thought we were going to go back to the chorus,
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
but this actually makes more sense. The anticipation of the first steps.
Okay, keep the chatter down in this room. T1, stand by for T1. Stay no stay all flight controllers. Retro, stay. Fido, stay. Guidance, stay. Control, stay. Telcom, stay. GNC, stay. Ecom, stay. Surgeon, stay. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go. Retro, go. Fido, go. Guidance, go. Control, go.
Oh, they had fun with this. Yeah, this is another one of theirs that they go in a catchy direction. It's interesting to see the album kind of ebb and flow like this, more atmospheric ones and then more traditional music ones where we have a melody on top of everything. I think it's interesting to sort of view this in the same light of Gagarin. Gagarin? I don't remember how to pronounce that now. Yuri. We're just going to call it Yuri's song because I can pronounce that one. Track number 3, though, the jazzy one. This kind of features a lot of that same bounciness, danciness, energy. I would say there's a lot of victory in here, though there's less of a party element to it. It's less bombastic, sure, but it's still groovy, it's still bouncy, and there's still some really catchy melodic elements to it that we just haven't seen in a while. Maybe even since track 3. What I think makes this song stand out even more, though, is structure. Most of these tracks have been linear in a sense. Yeah, let's go in this direction. They've been linear in a sense. So, like, I can say, this is the A section and the B section, and then maybe back to an A or maybe to a C or something like that. Linear, though, right? In each of the sections, there'll be a build-up, usually, kind of a linear growth. And that's generally been the songs. It's typical post-rock stuff, right? Exploring an atmosphere rather than building out a series of sections that can be repeated. Then we come to this track, though. I think this is the only one on the album that, as far as I can tell, falls into an A B C B pattern, where B is a legitimate chorus. I think part of this is built by the idea that slow burn is the definition of the album. Everything here is about fully exploring a sound. That doesn't really work too well with loops, catchy loops at that. But the other aspect, which has kind of been very much obvious for this whole time, and it never really dawned on me, without lyrics, without words that are designed to be rhythmically appropriate and melodically appropriate, it's kind of tough to create the feeling of a traditional song that uses a verse chorus setup. And so it makes sense that if the words part of it, the language part of these songs are linear, then the musical elements would be too, so that they can grow and build with what's being said. And so here we addressed that. Public service broadcasting decided not to use, I believe anyways, maybe the delivery of all of this in the cockpit was 100% straight up chorus material, but I'm gonna wager that there's some editing and chopping up going on here in order to create the catchy chorus of this track, as we have the main voice asking if each section or system, I don't know what it is ready to go, and somebody responds with go. And pairing it with the music is just creates this very catchy, very groovy, very cool, and oddly melodic chorus. It's the only time I think that we've seen very heavy editing like this. As I mentioned during the reaction, it's easy to spot where parts of the samples have been cut off abruptly in order to create space so that we can line up a new idea on a beat one of a fresh idea, of a returning to the beginning of a bar. This is clearly seen on Race for Space. If you need some examples of this, go check that out. You can tell that Kennedy's speech has been chopped up so that there's always a starting of a statement on beat one, and it lasts for however long it is. It doesn't sound like there's too much editing going on there, but instead of continuing on the speech, there'll be a long pause at the end of a general idea so that the next general idea can begin on a beat one, and it can line up with the music a little bit better, even if there isn't a rhythmic element that's really paired to it. Now, language, just especially English language, has cadence and rhythm built into it, and so the songs can easily be built around that. You can find a general vague sense of tempo and build your song around it so that the speech kind of works a little better with the music, but again, we haven't really seen anywhere that the speech has been chopped up in a way to create something more melodic, more musical. And that's what happened in Go. And because of that, it gave them the freedom to not explore something quite so linear. Now, maybe this still is a bit of a linear exploration. Maybe this systems check has to happen multiple times. We can still explore it in a temporal fashion, but allowing us to return to this, to create a chorus to return to go to after each verse, after the bridge that honestly acts like a pretty typical bridge, giving us a brand new idea. This one taking the energy down a bit and allowing us to sort of just bask in a sense of calm for a moment before we bring that high energy, dancey stuff back. This is an ABCB song and not something I ever would have expected on here, especially given the concept of the album that I've grown to, appreciate. And I really appreciate this. They had a fun time building this one, I think, and it shows a bit more of their chops with traditional structure. I enjoy it. It's a very cool one, and it stands out simply by being typical. I don't know. It's pretty cool stuff. Now, Valentina, I don't have a lot to talk about. I mean, it's the reason why I just let the track roll over. It is a very chill song. It feels relaxing, as I mentioned, like laying on your back in an ocean, just gazing at the sun. Well, that'd be bad. Gazing at the sky, the blue and the clouds, and no cares at all. It is a massive lull in the album, which I think I mentioned about E.V.A. too being a bit of a lull, but I think that one makes quite a bit of sense given what's going on with the speech. You know, it's the first spacewalk, the first time someone just floated in space outside of a vehicle. The idea of a floating weightlessness, kind of empty sound worked for it. I didn't hear any words on this one, unless the vocals were singing something. All I heard were random syllables, though. It's probably because the notes themselves were so distant that even if they were saying something, the distance between the syllables didn't allow me to hear them as words or sentences. So all I'm left with is a song that feels like floating. And maybe we could be returning back to the idea of E.V.A., of exploring the weightlessness of space. I don't know. We'll hit some lyrics and find out in a second, but I did enjoy the atmosphere of it regardless. I kind of wish it had a little bit more oomph to it. I think that most of these songs are a bit on the simple side, as I've already explained. It's a positive for the album, but it's a positive because it embellishes on the emotions in the samples. Without any words here, at least none that I could pick up, I just have a minimalistic atmospheric track, and while I enjoyed it, 4.5 minutes of not much change, I mean, it kind of turned into track 3 again, where I really liked the idea, but it definitely overstayed its welcome. Let me check out the lyrics for both of these, and then we'll wrap it up with the final track of the album, Tomorrow. The track's called Tomorrow. You don't have to come back tomorrow to see the end of this album review. I just wanted to... Never mind. Alright, so... Valentina. That's all that's said in the song. I guess all the harmonies are just the 4 syllables, Valentina. They're sung by the Smoke Fairies, which is another band that's featured on the track. I guess they're just Smoke Fairies. There's no the there. What was played in parts, though, is the very limited amount of recordings that there are of her voice while she was in space. And she being Valentina Tereshkova. She was a skydiver and the very first woman to go to space. She spent 3 days in orbit but suffered from space sickness and technical problems. because of the problems, the Soviets didn't publicize much of it, and that's why most of the recordings of her, there's a sparse amount of them. So this is interesting then. We get a little bit of it, but then mostly just her name over and over. I guess this is just a nice way to bring attention to it, to talk about another first in the space race. But I'm kind of curious again what's up with the chill, calm, without knowing much about the flight other than that it had difficulties and that she had a difficult time adjusting to 3 days in space, which probably makes sense. I wonder what kind of simulated stuff they went through to train. I'm sure it's not as much as it is today, because now we have people, living up in space stations. So you got to do a lot to prepare your body for that. Probably weren't doing that back then, not to the same degree. But again, it just sounds like it was a tumultuous expedition, and yet the music is just calming all the way through. I think this is the first song that I just haven't really got. I love the song. I think it's fine. The atmosphere is fantastic. I enjoyed it for what it was. I don't understand how it relates to what's put above that, though. All right, and Go is about the Apollo 11 trip to the moon with Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. What I like about this is that it doesn't go for the cliche lines that you expect. It actually takes you up into the landing, and then the song stops. It's about the energy and anticipation and victory of simply landing the spacecraft. Doesn't get into the actual walking on the moon. I like that. Highlighting of a much larger but less popular victory. Talks about Apollo control, speaking to the Apollo 11 craft, saying that, if everything's good to go, we're going to go for the powered descent, which is, the landing part. And that's where the chorus comes in. He calls all of the stations retro, go, FIDO, guidance, control, telecom, GNC, EECOM, and surgeon. They all say go. So he says, Capcom, we're good for powered descent. We do another chorus, and it says we're go for landing. Everybody hang on tight. We got some alarms going off, a countdown, and still getting goes regardless of the alarms. And then he says we've had shutdown, which is turning the ship off once it's landed, and says the Eagle has landed. We then have a calling of all the stations asking if we can stay rather than go, which is interesting because usually it's no or no go. But now we have stay or no stay, maybe stay or go. Does it say what the opposite is? Yeah, it's stay or go. What's interesting then is we have 8 stays and then 16 goes, finishing off with go, 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 which makes me think that we might have skipped over the entirety of the moonwalk element and just went back to the relaunch to come back to Earth. Or maybe the second parts of goes that come in after the stay is about you are go to leave. I'm not entirely sure. It might just be a really great way to wrap the song up. Because it is. It brings all that energy back. Yeah, this is just a fun song about one of the greatest accomplishments in space exploration to date as far as human piloted exploration. And it's, I think it captures a lot of the electricity of the event, while also retaining a lot of the probably energy and anticipation and just, rigid, like a bunch of gears all working together, right? Because this isn't just the 3 astronauts who made it up here. It's all the people, the scientists who figured out all the information to build all of this, the engineers. the people who built the ship itself, the people who figured out what kind of training needs to go into it, all of the people at flight control. I mean, I have no idea how many people actually are required to get a rocket into space, to land on the moon, and for everything just to work together so fluidly and efficiently. I think that's what the chorus really speaks to me about. Just how everything is perfectly in step. Everything just works together in the most seamless way. It's a way of bringing everything together on this. I think that's awesome. A way of both celebrating, of course, the people who made it up there, but everyone who was a part of this as well. It was a human victory, not just one for, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. No, this was one that required a lot of hands on deck, and every single one of them deserves praise for it. And with that said, let's wrap this up. Tomorrow is the final track, the longest one, 7.5 minutes. Let's see how this gets wrapped up. I vaguely remember another song starting like this. I mean, there's been a lot of tracks that are just quarter notes. So maybe that's what I'm thinking of right there.
Man completed his first exploration of the moon, December 1972.
This is the first non-4/4 track. We're in 5.
In which we came to be reflected in the lives of all mankind.
I love the really hard accent on that. That even something as graceful as that glockenspiel can have punch to it. That violin on the outside over here. It's coming in real smooth alongside all of the other staccato tones. I think what I love about this is we return to sort of that awe and wonder at a vast sound that we saw in the first track.
Some of you out there who are the promise of the future, come back to read it again. And as I take man's last step from the surface, back home for some time.
Once again, using human voices to wrap this up. The only other time we heard that was Valentina.
History will record that America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow. And as we leave the moon in Taurus Littrow, we leave as we came, and God God willing, as we shall return with faith and hope.
Rising tension, though.
Godspeed,
More
the crew of Apollo
reverb
17.
filling space. Is there really 3 minutes of silence on the end of this? All right, I'm gonna let it play out, you know, but I'm gonna start my analysis just so we don't have 3 minutes of dead air. I do think the purpose of this is about the vacuum of space. A lot of this song focused on, again, what I thought was feelings of awe and wonder, of vastness, the scariness of space, but also the awesomeness of space. Oh, we got something coming in. So is that legitimately 60 seconds of silence? Exactly 1 minute? Followed by a rising sun. This is exactly the soundtrack I would put behind seeing a sun. Well, not literally come up over the Earth, but, you know, seeing a sunrise from orbit. Yeah, it's just warm, comfortable. Full of possibility, full of positivity. Anything can happen. I'm not sure I'm completely sold on that ending, but I love what it represents. I like the artistic element of it, so I'm going to give it a pass, even though I think casually it kind of bounced off of me. A minute of silence followed by 2 minutes of a chord. It's more about what it represents, though, I think, and it sticks that landing really well. Like I was saying, a lot of this song is full of a vast wonder. I love that. It's about potential. It's about unlimited potential. It's about just how large the space is around us. I haven't looked at space pictures in a while. I know we've gotten some photographs back from something. I don't remember if it was telescope photos or if it was photos from a drone we sent out. But I mean, just the distance that space covers is vast. Like the Earth is such a small part of this solar system, of this galaxy, and this galaxy is such a small part of the infiniteness out there. It is ridiculous just how little room we take up in the vastness of everything. That kind of feeling of being so small and yet still getting off of our planet and trying to explore that. That's the type of accomplishment and wonder and adventure that I think is baked into this entire final emotion that they've decided to put into this song. I can't wait to get to the lyrics. I saw some, or I heard some stuff in there about uh, the people who will come out here next, or something like that. It's definitely forward thinking, knowing that this is only the start and that people will continue to explore space in better, safer, faster manners. We will eventually explore further this idea that, this is just the first step. Um, we've crossed the biggest threshold, is just getting off this rock. Now we just have to keep going. And yeah, all that feeling of wonder. That's the word I keep coming back to. I think it's a word that this album does phenomenally. Wonder. And so if the first few minutes of Tomorrow is supposed to represent the perception, human perception of space as a frontier, I like to think of that moment of silence as the emptiness of space too. The reality, I think, of being in space, of a place that can be just black, a vacuum with no sound. In some places it can just be pitch black darkness, no audio. I mean, you're talking about sense deprivation here. I like to think that that 60 seconds represents the reality of space. Not in a way that talks it up as being terrifying or anything, but just an objective truth about what we put so much spin on, what we impart emotion onto. And then within that, the sunrise, the potential for tomorrow, the beauty, the warmth. Yeah, it's a strong ending. I really think it is. Has a fantastic message too. I mean, I also like that it just generally talks about okay, we'll do that after the lyrics. We'll do that after the lyrics. I've still got a bone to pick with this album. But I like how it celebrates small victories, unknown victories, kind of looks at some of the smaller parts. It acknowledges everyone that goes into ensuring that this stuff works, that these monumental moments of history actually happened. Puts a little spotlight on events and people and puts a soundtrack to that I think is exceptionally effective. And I love the album for that. Let me check out what the lyrics are going on about here. I got something else I want to bring. Well, let me bring this up first before we hit lyrics. I've noticed a pattern. How public service broadcasting writes a song, for the most part. There's certainly deviations. I think Go deviates from this a little bit, and Yuri's track deviates a little bit, but the other 7 tracks all sort of fit a concept. It's a series of layered, percussive staccato ideas that create something that feels very interconnected and rhythmic and punchy. Even if it's not high impact, it's not a lot of held out notes throughout here. We certainly do have some of that, like on The Race for Space and Valentina. Both of those worked around a lot of long held out notes. But for the most part, there's a lot of piano, glockenspiel, bells, all sorts of pitched percussion instruments giving us these short notes, even when the piano, no, the guitars come in. A lot of the time it's short plucked notes in a series, creating this bouncy feeling throughout a lot of this. It drives rhythmic ideas, whether it's on a dancier side or an anticipatory idea of heightened a feeling of time. All of these percussive layers are built on top of each other, creating concepts of syncopation. Also, many of them are pitched instruments, so we also have not just syncopation, which is multiple rhythmic devices, but also counterpoint, which is multiple harmonic devices. I think the counterpoint is a little soft in here and only shows up a couple of times, but when it does show up, the syncopation and counterpoint work together to create some exceptionally groovy moments that I absolutely loved. And of course, after we've built a rhythmic foundation, you got to throw the emotion in there. And that's where the harmony comes in. You usually throw some chords in there. I did like on Tomorrow and was it E.V.A? Possibly, where we had a legato style melody on top of all of this layered staccato playing. Staccato is short notes. Dut, 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 dut. Legato is longer held out notes. Legato style could also represent just holding out notes, but it also represents a way of putting little space between notes. So if staccato is dut 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 dut, legato is la 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 la, very little space between your tones. And so having this more fluid movement on top of all this rigid staccato stuff, I thought was very cool. And they did that more than once. I wouldn't call it necessarily their bread and butter, but they knew when to implement it, and it was always phenomenal. And so I've kind of crafted a bit of a style here, a way of viewing how they build out an idea. This isn't necessarily an understanding of how they progress across a song, but if you go look at any specific moment, like the first 3 minutes of EVA, like first 2 minutes of EVA or something, and you just explore that one idea before they change things up, I think you can find that this exact idea of layering percussive ideas and then throwing harmony and melody on top of that, you'll find that shows up there as well as pretty much every section. You just really dissect any of them into this. And I think it showcases a nice point of view into the way that they compose music. And honestly, it's a fantastic way to go about doing it. You build out a foundation. This one, instead of being chord progressions, which is what a lot of rock and metal likes to do with their foundational ideas, instead of just chord progressions, they build out a dense rhythmic layer to then put what they want in the spotlight on top of. And it works very well. It's a very effective way of writing. And I love kind of seeing how everything works together throughout all of this. All right, I'm going to go look at some lyrics for Tomorrow, and then we will come to my final thoughts. All right, and with Tomorrow, we see America's last steps on the moon with Apollo 17. We have two of the astronauts here talking about their completion of the moon exploration of December 1972. And then we have a speech about how this might be the last time we step foot right now, but that moving forward, there will be another group of people, some of you who might be listening right now, who will follow in this and continue to explore the universe. The last few lines here says, and as I take man's last step from the surface back home for some time to come, but we believe not too long into the future, I'd like to just let what I believe history will record, that America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow. I really love that. That the hurdles that we've overcome today and rising up to the challenge today will inspire people to do the same and even more in the future. That everything we do, here he's stating specifically as a nation, but I think as a race, is built on the shoulders of giants. Everything we do today is because of someone who did something earlier. I think it's an astute observation, especially for something like this, the space race. How many technological leaps, how many sacrifices, how many victories and successes did it take for us to put people on the moon? It wasn't just the people, I was talking about the people who got Apollo 11 up there. Apollo 13? I don't remember anymore. I think it's Apollo 13, right? No, it was Apollo 11. On the track Go, all the people that it took to get them there, but I mean, that excludes all of the research from people who didn't directly work on that expedition. It involves all the training on previous astronauts. It involves knowledge of decades. And I like that here it's acknowledged, in a sense. Very cool way to wrap this up. Also, was that really the last time we went to the moon? Was in 72? I know recently we've been sending satellites in to space in general, and probes and all sorts of drones and stuff. We had a rover on the moon for a while there. Have we not put humans back out on the moon though? I mean, I guess there's no point to, honestly. Any data we can collect, we can use robots for. It just seems like such an accomplishment at the time that it's kind of strange it hasn't been replicated in 50 years. But again, this song is about looking forward. And I think it does a great job of that with the speech, but also musically, particularly with the sunrise ending. Now, my one bone to pick here. What is the point of fire in the cockpit? I like the idea of introducing some of the peril and dangers of the space race. I think that needs to be represented in a retelling of this. But I think that works best with a sense of pacing, which you don't really have much control over in that sense on an album. In a film, you can lead into that tension, you can play into it, have a really emotional moment, and then pull a lull out. Basically, the way that a lot of story writing is done is rising and falling action, where each subsequent rise is higher than the one that came before it. So maybe we come up this high and then drop down, and then we go up this high and then drop down, and then we hit the Act 3 climax, and it is the most climactic point. What I'm saying is this could be the end of Act 2. And in fact, Act 2 is traditionally the part where the victory of the heroes looks the bleakest. It's when they're at their lowest, they get their first defeat maybe, and they're sent home packing, and they have to regroup, and someone has to do a pretty big speech to get them pumped back up to go take down the villain. Yeah. So bringing in this moment, I think, works. It can work, but you need the lull after that peak. You need the moment for recuperation. This album doesn't give it. You get 3 seconds to try to dry away your tears before you're told, and now there's new advancements, and you get thrust into a dance track. And so I think there either needs to be more of this, especially since, as I mentioned, track 1 introduces sorrow, and it kind of introduces a danger into the vast feeling that we have in that opening track. I really thought it was going to be a larger part of the story. It was to focus on more of the dangers, the trials of this, rather than just the victories. And so, since it doesn't, Fire in the Cockpit not only doesn't have a great time resolving itself inside of the album, but it also feels out of place because everything else is victory. as much as I want this side represented, I'm not sure it fits in the album. It's interesting too because we've listened to something like this before. I don't remember. It's a post-rock group, and they did an entire album of people who did dangerous things for the betterment of mankind or for someone else or something, and ended up paying the ultimate price for it. You know, they give up their life. One person, I think, was a mountain climber and ended up getting frozen in the mountains. One person was a diver, ran out of oxygen or something. Oh, I think they gave their oxygen tank to someone else. It was a real deep dive, and the other person's oxygen gave out, and they died before they could get up. And then there was one about the Apollo explosion. And that Apollo explosion one absolutely wrecked me. And I wish I could remember the name of this band. I don't even know how to look it up. Or the name of the song, or the name of the album. I can picture the album art too. And I think when you have an album of that, of painting these tragedies in a heavy light, putting them all back to back, and showing how there is a shining light of humanity through these sacrifices, that is definitely a way that you can engage with this. And like I mentioned, we could also have a bit of a lull, a quieter ballad song after Fire in the Cockpit, just for the listener to recoup from that devastating song. Thrusting them right into E.V.A. just doesn't. Fire in the Cockpit is too heavy to fit in here. It's not thematically appropriate as far as I'm concerned. Excellent song. In isolation, phenomenal. I mean, it really got to me. But it did ruin my enjoyment of tracks 5 and 6. I just wasn't in the headspace for those. And I think it is a overwhelmingly poor decision to sandwich that between the dance track of 3 and the weightless floatingness and positivity of E.V.A. That's just... But I don't know where else to put Fire in the Cockpit, which is why I don't think it really fits in this album. So that's my only gripe, I think. I've mostly spoken positively about this, other than a couple of tracks that I feel kind of went on a bit too long. But that might be a me thing. So, these are my thoughts on public service broadcasting's The Race for Space. What did you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Did you enjoy the album? Do you have any interpretations of things that might differ from mine, or just any general thoughts that you'd like to share? Please put all of that down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. That wraps it up for today. Tomorrow I'll be back 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We have a live stream, usually goes for about 2 hours. We just chill, chit chat, listen to some good music. It's just fun, relaxed. If you can make it, I highly suggest you do. Otherwise, I'll be back Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.